Item 12, we have a status update on the Federal Emergency Management Administration's implementation of Oregon Biological Implementation Process. Sarah Absher, Director, Department of Community Development. Good morning, Sarah.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you so much. It's nice to see you this morning. So yes, have a update. I have a slide deck I would like to share with you. I'm going to go through the highlights. The slide deck is mostly so that we can post it on the community development website as a tool and resource for the public, because as you know, this topic is extensive and we are at a place where we are in a public comment period that is part of the NEPA review process for the draft implementation plan of the 2016 Oregon FEMA biological opinion. And so I'm going to go ahead and do a share screen and walk you through some things. And then let's see, let me go ahead and go to my slideshow. And then I am happy to circle back to various things if you need me to, but I'm going to fly through this quickly so I can get to the punchline. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to give you an update today. So quickly, just as I mentioned, we are in process of working with FEMA as a cooperating agency through their Federal National Environmental Policy Act review requirement. And part of this review process is essentially what in Oregon we refer to an EC analysis. So this is an analysis of environmental, social, economic, and energy impacts to whatever a federal agency is preparing to do. So in this case, it's an action to require National Flood Insurance participating communities to update our land use and development codes for stricter standards and I would say heavy mitigation standards to allow any type of development in our mapped areas of special flood hazard. So where we are at right now is we are in this public comment period. It opened just a short while ago at the end of August, and it closes October 6th. So working with the commissioners, I do plan on providing a letter and some comments for your consideration for the county to submit. But really what I'd like to also urge today is the public to also participate in this public comment period and have some links on the community development page as well as on this slide deck to make sure that folks know where to go to provide comments in this public comment period that is open until October 6th. So why are we looking at these updated regulations as part of this NEPA review process and this implementation plan? And essentially it's to ensure the implementation is consistent with the Endangered Species Act and the Magnuson-Stevens Act, which essentially coordinate fishery management to protect endangered species. And you can see on the side what the need is. And it is essentially to avoid jeopardy, which was something that was determined in the 2016 BiOP. Part of that plan includes implementation of no net loss standards and no net loss of floodplain functions. When we had our meeting in November last year at the Port of Tillamook Bay, we had great community turnout for that. It was that joint meeting with the Board of Commissioners and the Planning Commission. Molly Lawrence from Van Ness Feldman and I gave a presentation on these different no net loss standards and how they could impact development across Oregon, specifically in Tillamook County. And so you can see those three objectives relate to flood storage, water quality, and riparian vegetation. Overall, statewide, this program and these changes will impact 30 of 36 counties in the state of Oregon. You guys have seen that map before, but I think it's really important to show that map again. The other thing is to take a minute to also remind folks of what FEMA's definition of development is. And it is any human-caused change to improved or unimproved real estate. And what that means also is that when we think about development in general terms, what we think about is construction of new buildings. If someone says, I'm going to develop, our mind immediately visualizes a structure or some sort of structural improvement to vacant land. And by FEMA's definition, that is absolutely not the case. It's much broader. So there are 4 paths that FEMA has been working on to achieve those no net loss standards and that compliance for ESA and MSA, which is the Endangered Species Act and the Magnuson-Stevens Act. These 4 pathways, as you can see on your screen, are part of 3 alternatives that are in the draft environmental impact statement that we are currently reviewing under part of this public comment period for local officials, landowners, business owners, etc., to comment on. And these paths, as you can see on the screen, include 4 options. And one is the model ordinance that has very prescriptive mitigation requirements to achieve those no net loss standards that we talked about for flood function, water quality, and riparian vegetation. Option B is an ordinance checklist. This is where we could develop a checklist internally for permitting that folks have to use to demonstrate that they meet those no net loss standards. It gives us a little bit of a different path forward. It tries to make the process more straightforward. C is a customized community plan. So this means we would take everything that we have existing within our development code, potentially add a few things, and we would use what we have to try to demonstrate to FEMA and National Marine Fisheries that we've got a plan already in place that meets those no net loss standards. And alternative D would be to develop a habitat conservation plan with essentially NOAA and NMFS, which is National Marine Fisheries. Tillamook County, we spent 2 years, almost 2 years, working on options C and D as FEMA was developing them through 2018, 2019. We had a local working group with local experts. NOAA representatives were at these meetings, as was FEMA. And unfortunately, we know firsthand that C and D are next to impossible, at least for our community, to meet. C, we cannot use our current codes to meet those no net loss standards. And D, the cost and the time to develop a habitat conservation plan for Tillamook County would be substantial. I'm going to show the slide a couple of times, but basically taking those 4 pathways that I just described, what FEMA is looking for public comments is to decide which of these 3 alternatives should move forward as part of this NEPA review process. Alternative 1 is essentially no action. We use the existing development codes we have, and those no net loss standards and mitigation requirements would not apply. Alternative 2 would be that we as a community and several communities across the state would implement one of those options A through D, so model ordinance, checklist, essentially choose your own adventure if you can get there, and then the habitat conservation plan. With alternative 2, there would be an exemption to having to meet those no net loss standards for projects that have some sort of federal nexus, projects that require Section 7 consultation, federal permitting. Their federal permit requires, state federal permit requires some sort of environmental impact statement all on its own. I would say some of the projects that you could think about that we're familiar with of this alternative 2 that would be exempt from those no net loss standards would be a bridge where Public Works has to get that federal permit for the bridge, or there's federal funding that has that nexus that's going to require that environmental impact statement. Port projects, in-water work require this federal nexus. But what I would caution is that just because it's some sort of a facility improvement project, not all facility improvement projects have that federal nexus. So it still does not get us everywhere we want to go with infrastructure, whether it's port, roads, sewer, water, etc. Alternative 3 means everything must comply with those no net loss standards and mitigation requirements as part of those pathways A through D. So even if your project has that federal nexus, Alternative 3 says, no, you have to go through and meet these no net loss standards anyway. Put this slide in here because I think this is a really good slide from FEMA. I actually took a photo of it at a presentation because when we talked about development and what is FEMA's definition of development, and moreover, what requires a floodplain development permit, this slide is very telling. Again, it goes beyond structures. And this slide is relevant to this conversation because these types of development activities are subject to those no net loss standards and those mitigation requirements. So what do we mean when we talk about no net loss standards and avoid, minimize, and mitigate? So again, going back to that meeting last November, we had some clear examples of how mitigation would have to occur using development permits and projects that the department has already worked through. So this means if you put a structure in the floodplain and you're taking away flood storage, how do you create new flood storage to offset that loss? When we talk about tree removal, what are those ratios of where you have to plant additional trees to make up for the tree or 2 or 3 that you removed? When we talk about paving and driveways and roofs and impervious surface, what do those mitigation ratios look like? And so this is part of that no net loss, to where if you cannot avoid, then you have to minimize and mitigate. So these are part of those standards. I'm going to show you some examples that will be in those pathway options if someone is supportive of Alternative 2 or 3. And so I've just, instead of redoing the work we've done, both Oregonians for Floodplain Protection and FEMA have done a couple. So just want to give you a look at this slide. I love the dump truck diagram because there's, a dump truck that we see on the streets usually has 10 cubic yards of material. So if you look at paragraph 2, for a 1,500 square foot home and 20 foot by 40 foot driveway, require 3,400 cubic feet of soil to be removed from that area in the area of special flood hazard. And the key is also at the same base flood elevation for replacement of flood storage. That's also assuming it's in the same reach, which means you would do that work either on site or within close proximity to where the development was occurring that is hydrologically connected to that area that you're working. This came out of Appendix E of FEMA's draft environmental impact statement. They have some great examples in there, but they did their homework too. And you can see on here, it has those floodplain functions. So the no net loss standards for flood storage, water quality, and vegetation. And then they did their own analysis of impact, meaning what the proposed project is. And then there you can see what it would be for required mitigation. And those mitigation ratios, et cetera, are in the document. I would say with this conversation today, it's hundreds of pages. I don't think many folks from the public are going to have the time to read it. And I love these examples because this really puts it in real time on the ground. Again, so in the draft environmental impact statement, they talk about roughly 5.4% of all residential lands and cities are in the SFHA. We're working with the team, the FEMA team. Part of our comments will be there are some discrepancies in some of their tables. We're having cities and counties go through and make sure that those ratios for areas of impact are accurate, but assuming that they're right. So again, for a 1,500 square foot home, the mitigation area is roughly 1/4 of an acre. And I would say this average size of a lot in an urban area, this not only applies to our cities, but also a lot of our unincorporated communities. Because if you think about lotting patterns in Oceanside, Pacific City, Nescoin, Idaville, most of our lots are roughly, they are roughly they're 0.10 to 1/4 of 0.25 acres in size. And, what you can see by this slide is that they would not be able to mitigate on that property to build a home at a 1,500 square foot home. So I've got a couple of other things in here in that Appendix E for those who might be interested. They also talk about some different projects. So I pulled the slide out that talks about a port improvement project. We have 3 ports in our county. The Port of Garibaldi is on the water. The Port of Nehalem and the Port of Tillamook Bay also have areas of special flood hazard mapped within their industrial parks. Just another visual so you can see with those pathways for mitigation to those no net loss standards, FEMA has some good diagrams of trees. So how many you would have to replace. And this is in that 170-foot riparian buffer zone that follows bodies of waters and areas and mapped areas of special flood hazard. But you can see that even the tree planting requirements can be substantial. And these alone could trigger an additional hydrologic and hydraulic analysis. If you're planting trees in areas in the floodway, it may limit a building footprint because of the amount of trees that you have to plant, or you have to plant the trees somewhere else and within the same reach or watershed to meet your mitigation requirements. So I'm going to go back to this slide again. So looking at all those mitigation requirements, we have 3 alternatives to comment on. Alternative 1 would be no action, which means that we do not apply the no net loss standards and continue to proceed with what we have for our floodplain development codes. And then alternative 2 requires updates to apply those no net loss standards and standards for mitigation with the exemption of those federal nexus projects. And then alternative 3 means everybody, federal nexus or not. Going back, think about that slide about what's development and what requires permits. We would have to all meet those no net loss standards or mitigate and meet the standards through mitigation. One of the other things to talk about is the residential piece of this. So just want to, we put this together as part of Oregonians for Floodplain Protection, and I took this slide because I thought it was very informative when we start talking about those economic, social, environmental, and energy impacts as part of the NEPA review. So this is a really good slide for the public to see, is that if we change our codes, so that would be alternative 2 or 3, this is one of those impacts. And then here's the analysis for commercial and industrial. So this is part of that social and economic impact analysis if alternative 2 or 3 are chosen by FEMA for implementation. And then for agriculture. And that's taken out of the draft EIS. And then the last one I have is for port projects. So the other thing is the cost. So when we look at economic and social impacts, what are the costs to local jurisdictions? And there will be significant costs. As we know, FEMA will not be providing any financial assistance to communities and local jurisdictions to implement alternative 2 or 3 if chosen. And I'm just going to read this. It is assumed that each of the 233 NFIP participating communities would spend on average $100,000 to $200,000 to achieve initial adoption and implementation. The total cost may be $23 million to $47 million for the full Oregon Plan area. These costs do not include staff time or training for permit review. And one of my concerns is, even though we are not the city of Portland, we are rural, and in some ways we are smaller, we are one of the most heavily impacted areas because so many of our cities and communities, our agriculture areas, our ports, are within these mapped areas of special flood hazard. And then just to add to that, alternatives 2 and 3 would have major long-term impacts on land development and land use. So this is where we are concerned about housing efforts, abilities to expand urban growth boundaries, what this could do for property rights takings issues, etc. And then just wanted to also put in one more slide here about the summary of impacts related to alternative 2 and 3. So alternative 2 and 3 do result in beneficial effects on fish, aquatic wildlife, and endangered species. And then again, taking a slide that we put together for our presentation at Oregonians for Floodplain Protection. This is a slide that takes each of those alternatives. So alternative 1, which is the no action, puts this in a place where we do not see significant or adverse impacts to human. So that would be your social and economic. But based on that 2016 biological opinion that assumes any development in areas of special flood hazard will result in jeopardy of an ESA listed species, it assumes that there are no beneficial effects. Alternatives 2 and 3, you start seeing where there are those significant adverse impacts to humans, so the social and economic elements. And over time, you do see those total beneficial effects to ESA listed species, fish and aquatic wildlife, vegetation, etc. So I'm just going to go back to the slide, because this is in our public comment period. This is what we're talking about between now and October 6th. So again, for not just local officials, this is a call for public action to respond to FEMA and advocate or share thoughts of which of these 2 alternatives. So I took this slide from FEMA in the meeting that occurred yesterday. We've got 2 more meetings coming up, so I've got another information slide on this. But this is what FEMA said, what they want to hear about. And I would just urge the public also to consider, you don't have to be a biologist, you don't have to be a hydrologist or an engineer, you don't have to be a land use expert. This is about human and economic effects. It can be about wildlife and ESA effects and water quality. You know, we are all supportive of actions that promote water quality, fish habitat, and ESA recovery. But this is, you know, in land use, there's a lot of times where it's so technical and data driven or litigious, and there's lists of legal criteria. That's not what this is about today. This is about, as someone who lives in a community, what alternative would you support? And there's some helpful comments, ways to write letters for FEMA. Again, this will all be on the community development webpage too, so folks can find this about how to comment. There are 2 meetings that are coming up. That's my next slide deck. They're in the evenings, but each meeting has a court reporter in attendance to capture verbal comments. So if you want to attend one of these virtual meetings, maybe you don't want to write a letter, or maybe you don't want to submit comments on FEMA's public comment portal, you are welcome to attend one of these meetings, and the court reporter will be there to take your statement. The meetings that FEMA is holding are virtual only. So these are the 2 dates of the meeting. There's one tomorrow night from 6 to 8, and one on September 30th from 6 to 8. And the easiest way to find the meetings is actually to go to the Oregonians for Floodplain Protection site. We have the links and the buttons right there, so you don't have to dig through those FEMA sites and try to figure out where to go. And then again, just wording it in a different way. This is what FEMA is looking for in those comments. And then just quickly, here's the schedule for implementation. So this public comment period is open until or through October 6th. FEMA will be continuing to work through that NEPA process, I hope, as a cooperating agency. Tillamook County has an opportunity to remain engaged at the table. They will give a formal letter with that technical assistance. Again, no financial assistance. They're going to do that for about 7 to 8 months. And then about 1.5 years after that letter, after this NEPA process is done, we will be required to comply. And then again, putting all of this stuff on the community development website. I've got some other helpful links that I will put up, including quick access to the draft environmental impact statement and others. So that was a lot of information in a very short period of time. Happy to answer any questions, but just really, again, the call to action of the public to provide comments on these 3 alternatives. You know, we have a lot of folks in our communities that don't live in floodplains. They don't own property in floodplains, but it's not just about the people who live in these floodplains. Think about any road you could pick in Tillamook County that you drive down to go from point A to point B. Each of those roads traverse at some point through a mapped area of special flood hazard. If we cannot afford to maintain our roads, right, because paving was on that list, if we cannot even afford to maintain our roads through paving or through infrastructure, etc., driving from point A to B will become a problem that is an economic and social impact. And just, you know, encouraging folks to kind of broaden their thought in terms of how could this affect me? Think about your boat launches. Think about where you like to go. Think about the businesses you like to visit. Think about, from an economic standpoint, our truck haulers. We have log haulers, we have milk haulers, etc. That ripple effect, the indirect effects will impact us all. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that. That's we're at a crucial juncture. We've been in a couple other crucial junctures, and we are at one now with the public comment period. It is absolutely critical that we get as many public comments as we can, and that they are specifically and appropriately directed toward the talking points FEMA has asked for. This is much like a land use decision where we often want to rage in a public comment and just talk about how we hate it. But at the end of the day, the hate it comments just get circular filed because they don't actually address anything in the plan. So I think really spending a little time with that slide that had alternative 1, alternative 2, and alternative 3, and recognizing and realizing that alternative 1 is at this point, you know, the one that allows us to remain where we are. I did attend the meeting on Saturday and just listened to FEMA's presentation just because I thought, well, what are they going to talk about? And I think the thing that was most, I think, impactful to me and struck me is that I call it the little bubble chart that Sarah shared. They had a version of that bubble chart where it talked about no impact, limited impact, significant impact, and beneficial impact. And they had shrunk it down. And they had a top section which said human, and a bottom section which said species. And when they did that and shrunk it down, what became so absolutely clear is that this is, there is no winning in this particular EIS. either the human beings lose it all, or the fish gain nothing, right? Which FEMA is going to say if the fish gain nothing, they have not met their requirement, which means to me, this is a false choice. When you come down and the analysis says either fish lose or people lose, you need a different alternative. That alternatives 1, 2, and 3 are not enough, and FEMA should be back at the drawing board looking for a solution in which we have some beneficial and some limited impact, right? That there has to be a better way to implement this than what they've given us, because it is a false choice between people and fish. And I just absolutely 100% disagree with that. So it's interesting information, take some time with it, but absolutely make public comment, absolutely look at how it will impact you, how it will impact your communities, and speak directly to the points that FEMA is looking for. So commissioners, comments, concerns?
You can see me moving around here. So this is so absurd, and it's just lazy. And I have one of our constituents called me, and they have a business within the special hazard flood area. It's literally several hundred feet away from the river. And if I'm understanding this correctly, if he wanted to build, let's say, another structure, he has to offset it with a hole in the ground on the property. Is that correct?
He would have to create the storage at the same base flood elevation. So
Okay.
it can't be a hole in the ground, because then you don't meet those fish egress requirements. He would have to find a place in the same reach at the same base flood elevation to create that new flood storage space at the same elevation he took away. So the whole method doesn't work.
Right. It's absurd.
I don't know how people are
I
going
see
to
Will
do it.
Chappell on the call on the meeting, so I'm hoping he's going to be writing extensively about this and getting public comment there. I think I really appreciate your reference to the roads. I think people who think, oh, it doesn't affect me, it affects everything we do in Tillamook County. And that's what, when I say it's lazy, is once again, they're not considering our situation here, what we've done, the health of our fish, the fact that we can keep endangered species. I can retain a native salmon here. Is none of that's taken into consideration on the practices that the farmers already do, that are sensitive to the environment. And this is one of those things where I'm going to do all I can to get people to public comment, because if we don't, we're doomed. I mean, we are. Development is doomed. Sarah and I have talked about some farmers, some of the projects they're trying to expand their operations, and they can't, or the cost becomes so prohibitive that it becomes impossible. Now, I just want to ask him, with our lawsuit, how does that fit into what's going on?
That was the other thing I had for you. Yeah.
So,
So before we jump to that, Commissioner Bell, would you like to make a comment regarding the EIS, and then we could jump to the lawsuit conversation?
Yeah.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah.
So Sarah, when you showed the slides that had cost impacts, I wonder if you could go back to those for a minute, or just speak to them, because they're text heavy, and just sum up for us the cost to somebody who's building a house is going to be, for example, 10 to 30% higher, or whatever it was. Just sum up the categories for us.
Yes. So the estimated increase in construction costs for a single family dwelling to be built in area of special flood hazard would result in almost a 30% increase in cost to meet those offsite mitigation requirements, and almost 10% increase in cost if the development could occur on the property. And Commissioner Bell, that's a great question. What I would offer to that is I am less worried about the cost, as terrible as it is. And for me, my mind goes back to, if you are a residential property, your property just simply may not be big enough to do the mitigation at all. I mean, they're both frightening, but the reality is that even if you have the money, you still may not be able to, just because you can't meet mitigation. The monthly principal, so the other analysis that we had was that the monthly principal and interest payments would be approximately $630 a month, or over $7,500 more a year to pay for offsite mitigation, or approximately $2,500 per more a year if the mitigation occurred on site. Because with that mitigation, it's not a one and done either. You have to maintain it, and the building permit, the certificate of occupancy for you to move into your home, for your loan to close out or your loan to shift, whatever's going to happen. I cannot give you a certificate of occupancy until those mitigation measures are in place. So think about if you also have to mitigate and create those mitigation areas. Those could take extra time. They could take a significant amount of time. So, and I think the costs that we talk about too, they don't take into account those interest, like those construction interest loans, all of those loans that happen while you're building. And those loans will continue to roll because they won't stop until you have that certificate. And it will be the community development department's responsibility to make sure all of that happens, and those maintenance areas, those mitigation areas continue to be maintained. So it's also ongoing costs. It's ongoing for all of us. It will never end.
And don't forget the flood insurance cost.
And flood insurance, correct. Yeah.
That's
so
right.
It's dreadful. Considering our current housing shortage, our current housing crisis, this just exponentially increases the likelihood that it will become more and more difficult to build housing in Tillamook County. And that's whether it's an individual building their own house or a developer building in the flood hazard area. I was also interested in the I appreciate Commissioner Scar emphasizing that alternative one is our best of the three choices. And I was interested for you to outline how. I think we spent a good deal of time on what are the impacts of alternatives 2 and 3, but could you say a little more about what is the impact of alternative 1? If we ask the public to, I know you're not asking this, but we could. If we ask the public to write in and support alternative 1, what does that really mean for them?
It means there's no change to existing permitting. Now, no one likes the existing permitting structure and all of the requirements. I will be the first one to acknowledge that and apologize for that. However, it won't change, right? So what we do now, what customers and the public can expect in terms of stormwater management, maintaining riparian buffer zones as we have them today between 15 and 50 feet, not 170, right? So the predictability of this is your permitting process. It's a yes or no. Did you elevate? Do you have your ventings? Do you have your stormwater, features in place? Are you maintaining your riparian vegetation if you are within so many feet of a body of water? It will stay as it is.
And that will satisfy FEMA's requirement.
That is alternative 1, but it does not satisfy the ESA component that has brought us to this conversation today.
It really is asking for an additional alternative, further analysis. It's acknowledging that at this point in time of the 3 alternatives, we're better not to meet the compliance and to keep working at this than we are to accept one of the false decisions of 2 or 3 that basically has significant impact on Tillamook County economy, on the economy and the residents who live here, that is irreversible. So I think, yeah.
That's right.
Because it does not ultimately meet FEMA's responsibility. So from my perspective, it's saying to FEMA, we refuse to take the false choice, which says either that basically we have to take the significant impacts as human beings and communities. We want number 1, you get back to the table. So
okay.
Get it right. Sense. So that's my perspective. Sarah, tell me if that's incorrect.
Yeah.
But that's my perspective.
So that is a great segue to me putting on my Oregonians for Floodplain Protection hat, board member. So that is exactly what we're doing, is so to add maybe a glimmer of hope in this very, depressing conversation, is that we, as Tillamook County, as a member of that organization, continue to work and reach out to our congressional delegates. And, without over speaking, they are listening. And we're very appreciative of that, because Commissioner Scar, exactly what you said, ideally it would be none of the above. And let's keep working at this at the table, because we do want to see some beneficial effect. We understand that alternative one does not garner the results or help better address those ESA objectives, those three objectives of flood function, water quality, fish recovery, riparian habitat protection. We can do more, but alternatives 2 and 3 are just completely devastating from an economic and social, that human impact element. I expect movement on that coming soon. With the Pickums, which is a part of this, I was excited a couple of months ago at a leadership team meeting, because I had shared that we were talking to FEMA. FEMA was at the table and was looking at considering that alternative 4 approach that we developed for Tillamook County in lieu of one of the 3 Pickum options. Unfortunately, other federal agencies were not willing to come to the table to have that conversation. And that is one of the areas we remain today, is specifically, urging national marine fisheries, please come back to the table with FEMA and communities and our state and congressional leaders, and let's continue to talk about how we could do this better, so there aren't clear winners and losers, right? We don't have to pick one or the other. So those conversations are continuing. Again, updates through Oregonians for Floodplain Protection. So that is really where that focused effort is coming from. And our team of attorneys. So looking there, we are still in process of litigation over the 2016 BiOP. That should be starting here this fall. So we are not, while we have to be smart and respond during this public comment period today. Remember, there's 2 pieces of this. There's this process that FEMA must continue to do, but there's also these other places and other arenas where we are advocating for a different kind of change. So both are still ongoing. And I want to reassure folks who, again, going back to that November meeting, who felt litigation was very important and that Tillamook County take action. Those actions are continuing. Lastly, what I would also just kind of for public benefit, there's been a lot of news about FEMA and NOAA and NIMS and changes in these federal agencies' organization structure, current federal administration cutting programs. What we are talking about today is a lawsuit. This is not federal legislation. This is specific to Oregon. So no matter what this current administration does in terms of reorganization of these federal agencies, waiting for that restructure and reorganization to make this go away is not going to happen. That's not a reality. So it is super important that as members of our communities, we don't wait for that to happen. We need to participate in this public comment period. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And I would also remind folks that those who are interested, join the Oregonians for Floodplain Protection, be a part of that conversation, as well as the fact that that lawsuit is being funded by donations to that organization. There's not some magic pot of money out there that's pushing this lawsuit. This lawsuit is happening because community members, from those being individuals to businesses, et cetera, governments are joining forces and putting money into this pot. So I believe as an elected official, I get to say whatever I'd like, right, Bill? So I'm going to also encourage folks, if this is scary to you, go to the Oregonians for Floodplain Protection website, learn more, and write your check, because this lawsuit will absolutely die if it goes unfunded. So that just has to be on the forefront as well. Write your public comments today, write your check tomorrow.
Thank you, Commissioner.
That's why I wanted you to clarify that there's two trains, both going in this direction, and we have to pay attention to both of them and be active in both. So
absolutely,
right.
Yes. Commissioner, anything further?
I'm just thinking about how to get this message out. So the link or on the community development website, does it have the slideshow you just showed us?
I'm going to post it as soon as we're done. Yes. And I did send out an email the other day to about 75 different community partners that we all work with, both government agencies, public business owners, to let them know I was doing this presentation today and that these slides and all this information will be on our website later in hopes that people will share.
Great, thank you. And also, it occurs to me to ask Jane and Debbie here in the room if after this meeting is concluded, we could take a clip of our recording of this meeting, if we could just pull out Sarah's presentation and put it someplace with a link so that we can all share that link and say, watch this presentation, make your public comment. I hope we can do that.
Yeah, I think we can. Additionally, would you like this on the county's homepage?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I think it's easier to find, no offense to community development. They have a very complicated page. So I think having it there, because Sarah's let people know it would be there, but the same link to the same information on our page makes a lot of sense. Homepage.
Yeah. Debbie, could you work with Jeff on that? Yeah, thank you.
Perfect.
And I'll let Debbie know as soon as I have everything launched. So and posted so she knows it's ready.
Thank you. Yes, County Council had a comment.
Sarah, I'm all for the first alternative, the no action alternative, and would consider writing a letter. And I appreciate that you're asking people to do that. I'm a little bit, I don't want to make it negative, but I mean, if you got an overwhelming response, do you think it would actually make a difference at the table?
That's the hope, Council. And I would say it could come in two ways. You know, it could come in the way of what alternative FEMA chooses. It could also come by way of those messages getting to our state and federal delegates to help support our efforts to find a different way.
Okay. And to that, I think also the importance of, even if you don't live in the floodplain, your voice is even stronger because you're showing that it's not just folks that are individually losing their rights. We have to all stand up for this. So.
Oh, for sure. For businesses, for
Yeah.
for housing, for future developments, for farms, and for the roads. I think Sarah's point about, the roads we all drive on. Yeah, it affects all of us.
Yeah, no, it's a huge impact. And, that Sarah shared the statistic that 5.4% of lands, that are special flood hazard, that's how much is impacted by this. But if you go into the EIS, dig a little deeper, back in the appendix, there is Excel table that shows in Tillamook County what those percentages are. And roughly, I believe 30% throughout the majority of our cities, of our residential and commercial lands, I think if you put it all together, it's somewhere in that range, are in the area of special flood hazard and will be impacted. So when people read, 5.4% across Oregon, that's not a big deal. It's a very big deal for us here.
And for visitors to come down and use our boat ramps and use our facilities and use the homes
That's right.
that are located within the hazard zone. So this is,
Yeah.
it's that important.
It is
I mean,
100%.
it touches everybody.
It does touch everybody. And as Oregon's economy is beginning to dip and stall a little bit, the last thing we want to do is have Tillamook County not only follow the trend of Oregon, but go far deeper because of this. Our economy needs to be strong, and we can't allow this to kill it. So lots of good reasons to get your comments in there and your checks. Sorry, shameless plug, but really, this is how it happens, right? This is how it happens.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions or comments for Sarah before we let her go today?
Thank you, Sarah.
So I do actually have, Tilda, do you want to come up and make a comment? So I will invite Tilda, who was one of our great community partners on this with the Tillamook Bay Flood Improvement District. So Tilda, if you could just make sure that microphone is on, that would be great. It'll be glowing green at the base. Okay?
It's on. Tilda Jones from the Tillamook Bay Flood Improvement District. My first comment is that what do we need to do to get a public meeting in Tillamook County? It's cowardly of FEMA to do online public meetings only when half the people in Tillamook County don't use their computers, don't do online meetings.
I would say that's by design.
I would say it's by design. I would say that we're not going to be able to change that, and it's not for lack of trying on Sarah's part. Trust me, there's been a lot of pushback done. What I will say is this is actually part of the larger NEPA process adjustments that are being done by the current administration. I am also on the opposite side of this with some timber work related to federal timber, where they're trying to move federal timber sales faster, which is great, except they've pulled counties out of any money in it, and we want to be able to make our public comments. But again, the NEPA process overall at the federal level, as I understand it, has been reduced to online so that we will not get FEMA to Tillamook County no matter how hard we push. So I think our challenge is how do we help people who typically are not online and doing that electronic work to have the opportunity to have their say, because that's really unfortunately and catastrophically and horribly our choice.
Yeah.
Yes.
I got a question, and Bill, this might be for you or Sarah, is could we have our own public meeting where at that meeting there could be a discussion and a consensus of which alternative they like, and maybe have a group, like a letter signed by those residents that don't have access to the internet? Is that something we could do? Or would it have to be something we do as electeds?
Or can we have a public viewing of the September 30th meeting with an opportunity for anyone in the room to make comment during that public viewing? So I think, we can't get FEMA to us. Can we get us to FEMA through our electronic link?
Commissioner, I would offer that is something we could definitely look at setting up, and maybe at the port or something. And I am happy to help do that.
Cool. So Sarah, let's look at that and let's see if we can do that, because then that court reporter that's standing there to accept all public comment during a remote meeting, if we had the camera and the microphone, so all people had to do was step up to the microphone in our room. Thank you for that request, Hilda. That's a great idea.
So what time is the meeting tomorrow?
The meeting tomorrow's 6 to 8.
6 to 8 p.m.
6 to 8 p.m. So can you be set up by then? People can come here?
No, it will be, if there's the final meeting is the 30th. Is that correct, Sarah?
It is. And we have a
September.
hearing tomorrow night, Tilda, so it would have to be the 30th.
It would have to be the 30th, but that gives us all time to figure out how we could do that and promote it and get people in the room. So yeah, it'll be toward the end of the month.
Okay, and what's the time on the 30th?
6 to 8.
Also 6 to 8 p.m.
Okay, so the commissioners are going to try to set it up so that people can come to this meeting room?
We don't know yet, Tilda, but we'll get that
To a place.
information out to a place.
That will be connected to the FEMA public.
Correct, so that we can listen to the meeting, like I did on Saturday, and then at the end of the meeting, they ask for public comment, and we would do our best to make, have our system set up so that we can make as many public comments as possible through that link.
That's excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for asking the question. Okay, I think then thank you, Sarah. You and I'll talk about that when we meet and how we pull that together. Excellent. All right. With that, then I will let Sarah go back to the other good work she's doing, and we will continue on our agenda. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.